Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud. All about humanity, so this right here for everyone. Uplift, amplify, empower everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're living in, it's time for Sumud.
Welcome to a special episode of the Sumud Podcast, where we uplift, empower, and amplify Palestinian Christian pastor and theologian, Reverend Munther Isaac. Reverend Munther pastors the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem and the Lutheran Church in Beit Sahur. He is also the academic dean of Bethlehem Bible College and has authored numerous articles on topics such as the theology of land, Palestinian Christians, and Palestinian theology.
And we are your hosts at Hasan and Zeina Ashrawi. Please don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you watch or listen, and follow us on social media, either at Sumud Pod or at Sumud Podcast. Without further ado, we welcome Reverend Munther Isaac to our show. Welcome, Reverend.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So, Reverend, it's been almost a year to date, or it has been a year actually, from when many around the world saw your powerful Christ Under the Rubble display. It was an extremely powerful display. Where did this inspiration come from? Where did the inspiration for it come from? Why did you choose to do this display? And a follow-up on this, what would it look like now, a year later?
Well, to answer the follow-up, unfortunately, Christ is still under the rubble. Never in my mind did I think that this war would last for as long as it did. But to go back a year ago, the concept or the idea of Christ in the rubble actually began the Sunday after the bombing of St. Porphyrios Church. And that was a difficult event for the Christian community here because many of our loved ones here had relatives there. One of the church members I pastor, her sister was killed in that bombing. And what made it difficult for me as well as a pastor is that very same day when the church was bombed and 18 people killed, we actually were praying the day it happened for protection for our siblings, for the war to end, and then to go back home and discover that the church is bombed and that innocent children were brutally killed. It was hard for us. It was hard to comfort those who lost loved ones. It was hard to make sense of what do we make of this. We pray and God, it seems, is not listening or maybe does not even care. And in our pain, anger, and trauma, the next Sunday I have to go to church and deliver a homily, and I'm not the kind of pastor who just ignores what's happening around. I had to address it, especially anticipating the pain, and people come to church for answers. And I remember I said while preaching, we search for answers, we search for God. And it's not theological or philosophical answers that people are seeking with, but are looking for, but something we experience. And I said, we look for God, and God is under the rubble in Gaza. He is the victim of the violence of empire. He's the victim of violence, and he suffers the same fate with the people of this land. I look at our scripture. When Jesus came, he was crucified at the hand of the empire. He experienced the violence of the empire. In fact, Jesus on the cross cried the prayer, my God, why have you forsaken me? So that concept of God in the rubble actually became like a movement, like a meme, and people were circulating it. God is under the rubble in Gaza. And so when Christmas came and we were preparing for our annual, celebrations, if you wish, we couldn't go on with Christmas as usual. And I shared with church members, let's do something that sends a message and that actually is so much in line with the Christmas message, because Jesus was born under occupation. The Christmas story is not this romantic story of Joseph and Mary delivering a son in a manger, but rather of this family that had to make a very brutal long journey because of a decree from the occupying power back then for census, which was a mean of control and taxation. And then they had to escape this ruthless ruler who killed children and, out of all places, escape to Egypt. So I said, let's bring the true meaning of Christmas and place Jesus under the rubble. And actually, I'm grateful that our church members went along with this idea and helped install it. We met, including children, families, and put it together. And we immediately knew this is something special for us because it spoke to our people first and foremost. It encouraged us and confirmed to the people that the message of Christmas is the solidarity of God with those oppressed, with those in pain, and that actually this is the true meaning of Christmas. Again, rather than the decorations and lights and Santas that came to us from the West, now it's actually a different, completely a meaning that's more authentic and more in line with the biblical story itself. That was the inception of the idea, and then I posted an image on my Facebook, not knowing that it will create really a global movement.
So, Reverend, first, I just want you to know I was extremely excited to have this conversation. I'm a Palestinian Muslim, and I was looking forward to chatting with you. However, there was one concern in my research, was that you are a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and that is a major problem for me. I'm a Washington Commanders fan, so I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Well, I studied in Philadelphia. My master was in Philadelphia, and you can't but become an Eagles fan if you live in Philadelphia. It's hard enough to be an Eagles fan. It's hard enough when you have to watch the games in the middle of the night, knowing the time difference. But it's a good season.
Well, it is a good season. Can we talk about your early days, specifically what you remember during the first Intifada and the experience that you had there and what you saw your family and your community go through?
The first Intifada is full of memories. I was 8 or 9 when it happened. I remember very clear the demonstrations outside of our house, the fear from the shooting, and usually we just lay down on the floor for a few minutes until it's over. The tear gas. At one incident, sometimes when we're playing football in the neighborhood and the soldiers come and they ask you to clean the roads because young Palestinians who threw rocks used to block the roads with big rocks so that cars can't follow them. So I remember one incident when he asked us to clean the road. Me being the child in the group, I couldn't carry any stones, and I was actually laughing at the incidents that my friends are carrying rocks, and the soldier saw me laughing and actually slapped me very hard on my face, asking, "Why are you laughing?" It's one of many, many stories that I can share, including how patriotic it felt, how special it felt. Back then, it was very difficult to carry the flag. It wasn't allowed to carry a Palestinian flag, and there would be demonstrations when they would carry me on their shoulders to carry the flag, being again the young child. So again, it's full of memories, including memories of seeing people shot in our school, homeschooling. Every Palestinian has many, many vivid memories. But also, interestingly, and maybe that's the beginning of something in my personal life, I grew up as a church kid. I am one of those who attended all summer camps and church events and would read the Bible and go to Sunday school. And I remember having even difficulty reading the Bible. What does it say about this? To the extent of, asking questions when reading stories in the Old Testament. Is God for us or against us? What does the Bible say about throwing rocks? In Christianity, Jesus is the embodiment of nonviolence. So a debate we used to have, when I grew up a little bit further, in our youth group is it okay to throw rocks at soldiers? Because, is it okay to hurt soldiers? These are the kind of innocent, yet really not that innocent questions that we've asked, because they uncover a deep wrestling with not just life, but faith, what the Bible says. And I believe that stayed with me. And that's behind the fact that right now I still ask this question in a more serious way. I write theology, I write about these issues. I debate on themes like the promised land, nonviolence, justice, and so on. And I can honestly say it goes back to my childhood when the Intifada is happening and we ask all these questions, again, given my upbringing in as a church going boy.
Yeah. And to follow up on that, I mean, I think there's a lot of it you had to reconcile between the inward expression of religion versus the outward expression of religion. And my understanding is that sometime during your Berzeit experience, is that the flip that happened where religion was no longer just an internal thing and became more of an outward expression of your faith?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I've always avoided politics, and I was actually told that a good Christian does not engage in politics, and that it's better to stay away from these political discussions. but it's impossible to do so in Palestine. Everything around us is religion and politics. So for a while, I actually thought we shouldn't ask these questions. We shouldn't be involved. And then Bir Zayt was different because this is when we experienced the second Intifada. The second Intifada was far more violent, far more dangerous on our lives. And you battled more with questions of hatred and revenge, especially given the amount of humiliation we faced at checkpoints, which was part of our daily experience as students going back and forth to university, or even worse, going back from university to Beit Sahur, where my house was. These experiences of being humiliated, challenged at the checkpoint, waiting for long hours, having soldiers mock you, fearing for your life many times at the checkpoints, led me to actually want to do something for my people. And honestly, I battled hate. It's like, because hate is toxic. Hate can take control of you to the extent that, you cannot enjoy anything. And the thing that came to mind while studying civil engineering in my last year is I want to do something for my people. I was actually involved in a music group. We played songs for Palestine. I mean, I was very engaged, but I was also engaged in our Christian youth group. So that's when I thought I want to study theology. For some reason, that was the only answer I came with when it comes to the question, how do I help my people? It's one of those moments where, just have believed God was leading me to that decision. I sensed a calling to study theology. And so after I graduated from civil engineering, I wanted to study in depth these questions. What does the Bible say about the promised land, the chosen people, and how can the Bible help us survive in this very difficult environment?
Yeah, and I think, following up on that also, I mean, I think there are influences in the Palestinian Christian community, particularly people like Naim Ati and liberation theology. Can you talk a little bit about liberation theology and how that influenced your perception of the work in Christianity and Palestine?
In my last year of university, actually, this is when I was introduced to the writings and works of Naim Ati. I was very much intrigued by the whole idea of not just liberation, but engaging critically with Christian Zionism, because that was another important question that was always circling around us. How do we respond to the challenges of Christian Zionism? Liberation theology is the idea, and of course the influence is first from Latin America. That's where it all originated. But the beauty of liberation theology is that it takes the shape and context and culture of where it comes from. So liberation theology in Palestine, yes, it's influenced by Latin America or the experience of African Americans, but it's still unique. It's still unique to our context, the same in every other context. But the basic premise behind it is that justice matters to God and human dignity matters to God, and that God seeks to liberate people not just from the bondage of sins, but also from structural injustice. And as such, the mission of the church is not only to deal with individuals and their struggles, but also with communities. And if that community is struggling from political injustice, then the mission of the church is to help liberate that person from the yoke of that injustice. And so liberation theology tried to expand the mission of the church from charity into advocacy and ending injustice, not just helping people whenever they're suffering, but also help remove the reasons behind their sufferings. And again, even if those reasons were political. And it also helped expand the message or the Christian message from the individual again into the community, so that the message of the church is not just me and I, but also we together as a community. And God's will for every community is that of liberation, of dignity, and justice. Reverend Naim Ati tried to introduce these concepts to the mission of the church in Palestine. And I think he was only articulating what existed in many forms and shapes, but didn't have this terminology or theological terminology, because Palestinian clergy were already dealing with these issues in different ways, including getting involved in the struggle, whether with the PLO or in other ways. There are, notable Palestinian clergy who were already involved, like Matran Kabuchi, Father Ayad, and others, Elia Khouri, who were even, close to the leadership of the PLO. And then there were others who were pastorally engaged, Father Shakur, who's later became Archbishop, and others. So the articulation of that already existed in different forms, and Reverend Atiq came at a good time to put words to it and formulate it as a Palestinian theology of justice, a Palestinian theology of liberation, and started Sabil. An important component of all of that is, how do we challenge the theology of Christian Zionism? And this today becomes to us, as we got even deeper in that field, how do we liberate ourselves from Western influences on how we read the Bible, and not just liberate ourselves, but liberate the world, because it's a really, not just misguided way of reading Scripture, but it's about the credibility of our Christian witness when we turn the Bible into a weapon in the hands of an empire.
Reverend, if you don't mind, I just want to go back again to your early days really quick, because I heard a fascinating story, and I sort of put myself in your shoes of how I would respond. But Bet Sahur was known for civil disobedience, not paying taxes. And I believe the Israelis came and took your family's car. As a little kid, what was your initial reaction or your feelings there?
It was fear the whole time. Did they come? Because Beit Sahur was under siege. And the other part of that story is, like, my father, like many others who knew that Israelis will come to our home, hid everything in someone else's house that didn't own, that Israel didn't want to tax. So our television, for example, and other things were already hid in someone else's house. And when the soldiers came and asked, "Where is your television?" and we said, "Well, it's being fixed," he said, "All of a sudden, every TV in Beit Sahur is being fixed. What's wrong?" It was that kind of solidarity. So what I remember from those days, again, is first the anticipation: is it our turn today? But then also the sense of solidarity we had together as a community. We were so tight as a community. We supported one another in every possible way. Those days, as I said, we had, for example, homeschools. Schools were closed, so we organized ourselves in every neighborhood to continue schooling. Baking bread together and distributing bread to homes. That's something I used to take part in, go and give bread or receive bread. That kind of community, especially as a child, a feeling that I could literally go from house to house and feel welcomed. And yes, go to that house, get bread, go to that. This sense of solidarity with one another is really what I take with me all those, many years after those events.
Yeah. So in one of your interviews, you mentioned that the primary mission of the church in Palestine is to preserve the Christian presence. And there are a lot of different moments in history. Think about Ottoman restrictions at the time, and then the British Mandate, and obviously the creation of the State of Israel. Can you, just for our audience, to learn a little bit more about Christianity in Palestine and the experience of the Christian people through those different periods of time?
Yeah, Christianity had a very unstable history, if I may use that word, meaning even the identity of Christians in this land changed and continued to evolve over years, depending on the political context. The first Christians were Jews, actually, Jewish converts, according to the Bible, who, believed that Jesus Christ is the Jewish Messiah. So the first church was in Jerusalem. But Christianity actually was a minority, was not that much of a big faith in Palestine for the first few years because of the persecution of the Romans. And later, when Christianity became the official religion of the empire, many came to Palestine and joined those who were originally in the land. So it was a Byzantine Christianity, When the Arabs came, we were Arabized gradually, then the Crusaders so this is the history kind of one generation after, one political reality after the other. Some historians say that up until the Crusaders, we were actually a majority in the land. And this was a big hit when the Crusaders came to the percentage of Christians in the land. And despite all these elements, and then the Ottoman Empire wasn't really that good for not just Christians, I think for everybody, but especially in the last days of the Ottoman Empire, that's when Christians began to leave. There was heavy taxation. There was also, they forced them to join the army. That's why today, for example, you find hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Christians in Latin America. Those were from that era. Some of them actually still have direct immediate relatives here and even homes of their ancestors that are still empty but are in Bethlehem. Many went to Chile, many went to Honduras. But when the British mandate happened in Palestine, when the British occupied and conquered Palestine, I think the percentage of Christians when it's anything between 12 to 15% of the population. And it was a strong presence, influential presence, playing an important role in the society and also in the Arab national movement. And then to think that from that percentage into almost 2% immediately after 1948, I think it becomes clear that the Nakba was a serious blow to the Christian presence in Palestine. And many scholars, including Palestinian scholars, detail the impact of the Nakba on the Christian presence, whether it is the refugees. One scholar puts the number of refugees to 50,000 Palestinian Christian refugees. Some say even more. Land confiscated, land that belonged to churches. Even churches closed, meaning communities that used to meet in a church and no longer continued to meet after the Nakba. Close to 30 Christian communities, 30 churches were closed. So it was a really big blow to the presence, to the psyche of Palestinian Christians. And I don't think we recovered, because since then we still look at ourselves as this tiny minority. When you are 1 or 2%, you always get this impression, is there a future for us? And we survive, and I think we survive by the survival is connected to our participation, because we're not a community that's isolated and doing, self-pity or just praying and not engaged in the social, economic, political life, education, culture, art. We're in every part of life, but especially in both education and the health sector. And that enabled us to continue to have a strong and impactful Christian presence in the land. Recent studies show that in the Palestinian territories, even though Palestinian Christians make close to 1% of the population, yet we are the third highest employer in the Palestinian Authority after the government and the UNRWA. And 1/3 of the health sector is church funded or church related. So you see our presence is so much related to the services we provide. But since 1948 until today, the wound has not closed. Immigration never stopped. And people leave for several reasons. And today, it's not just Christians who leave, everybody's leaving. It's hard. It's really hard to survive in this difficult reality. It's so hard to explain to people who are not familiar with life in the West Bank how complicated every element of our life is, from family registration to getting water, to getting electricity, to building, to traveling from one town to the other, to unifying with your spouse, to getting permits to pray in Jerusalem or to meet your relatives in Jerusalem, or before the war in Gaza, which was very, very difficult to get, or even in Nazareth. I have a church member who comes to pray with us. He's originally from Gaza. His wife is from Nazareth. He cannot be with his wife in Nazareth, and she comes and visits every other week or so, because their daughters, to be registered in the Israeli system, they have to live in Nazareth so that they go to universities and so on. This is the complication of life here is so hard. The restriction of movement, and the fact that most Christians in the West Bank, at least, live in the Bethlehem area, and depend on tourism means that whenever there is a cycle of violence, closures, or even COVID, we barely recovered from COVID and began to get tourism back, and now we got this blow. Eventually, people get tired of these restrictions, and this is something that's now after October 7th. My kids' school is literally 4 minutes away from our house. It's a nice empty road. When the soldiers decide we have no idea why to stand in that road, it could take up to 40 minutes. And you see the long line, and then you see the anger and frustration of people. It's 7 a.m. in the morning. You just want to drive your kids to school, go back to have a cup of coffee and go to your work. Even that is not possible sometimes. And eventually people get fed up of these many interruptions in life where it's actually becoming norms. And one more thing that I cannot emphasize enough, and I think this is new now, the sense of anxiety and fear we live in the West Bank. Actual fear from the settlers in between the roads. So to go to Ramallah, you have to think twice. Should I take this trip from Bethlehem to Ramallah? What if I go back in the night and there are settlers? And settlers are unhinged. They do whatever. But then there is this fear and anxiety from looking at what's happening in Gaza and thinking, will this ever be our fate? Especially when you hear the intentions of the Israeli Zionist leaders. They tell you they're not trying to hide their intention to annex the West Bank and ethnically cleanse people as much as possible. So you think, will this ever be our fate? And I know of many families right now who always have cash and if possible, visas on their passports. In case something happens, we will escape quickly. I mean, imagine such life when you're always sensing that someone could come and take your house. This is literally the sense we have in the West Bank today. As I keep saying, if I was a Zionist leader and think to myself, well, we just killed, 17,000 children in Gaza, and we destroyed the entire Gaza Strip and got away with it, so we might as well continue in the West Bank. The level of unaccountability Israelis feel, and that's not just the immunity. I mean, the green light they still have from the United States and to a certain degree from the UK and others makes us really afraid right now.
Hey, Zeina, do you know how we had to boycott mainstream soda brands? Well, now there's an alternative, and Palestine is in the name. Sumud Podcast is excited to be sponsored by Palestine Drink Shop, the nation's leading importer of Palestine Cola, which is proud to be a partner with Palestine Drinks, a brand making waves in the beverage industry.
Absolutely, Ed. In fact, 3 brothers of Palestinian descent based in Sweden were inspired by the growing demand for an alternative to mainstream soda brands, founded Palestine Drinks. Rooted in social responsibility, the company operates under its parent brand, Safad Foods AB. It donates 100% of its profits to support Palestinian civil society organizations or efforts.
If you'd like to show your support, please visit PalestineDrinkShop.com to pre-order Palestine Cola. Be sure to also follow them on Instagram at PalestineDrinks_shop for updates on new flavor releases and exciting giveaways.
We at Sumud Podcast are thrilled to have Visualizing Palestine as a sponsor. Visualizing Palestine creates free and accessible research-based visual tools that are utilized by educators, students, and organizers who want to provoke narrative change and raise awareness about the roots of injustice in Palestine. In fact, we are both members of Visualizing Palestine, and I personally have used Visualizing Palestine's resources and visuals as an organizer and activist in reports, presentations, and even at events.
Community support is the heart of Visualizing Palestine's work. Your recurring membership helps ensure they can thrive and continue making an impact. Join us today and be part of this important mission.
So to access the free downloadable visuals and for more information, please visit visualizingpalestine.org and follow Visualizing Palestine on Instagram at visualizing_Palestine. Reverend, one of the things that I've heard from so many, including myself, is that you center Palestinian Christians as part of the struggle for liberation in such a seamless way where, Palestinian Christians are part of the liberation struggle because we are Palestinian. It's, for us, it's daily life, like you just mentioned, whether it's the closure of Bethlehem or the kids walking in the street. And so there is no differentiation. Occupation does not differentiate. Apartheid does not differentiate. And definitely genocide does not differentiate. How does that reconcile with the American view of Palestine and Palestinians as it relates to Palestinian Christians and Muslims? I mean, as Palestinians being we're part of various religions. But how do you reconcile that with the American version, I guess, or Western version of Christianity versus Palestinians being composed of Muslims, Christians, and everything else under this?
Well, as Reverend Mitri Rahib says, in the West, there is an imagined Palestine rather than Palestine. They imagine it as the biblical land, empty until Jews came and made it a promised land. They have very little understanding of the reality on the ground. They function from a totally different sphere of reality. You have, for example, the new American ambassador to Israel who says there is no occupation, it's all Judea and Samaria, it's biblical land. So clearly his grasp of reality here is shaped by how the land looked in his imagination, of course, 2,000 years ago during biblical times. Nothing happened since then to him. He doesn't see us. And it's part of a very colonial mindset that only looks at the rest through the eyes of colonialism. And we are commodity. We could give half of your land to the incoming settlers, as they told us, and continue to blame us for not accepting, talking about the partition plan. But really to understand how many Christians in the West look at this land and the people, it's the phrase, a land without people. And that phrase does not come from a place of ignorance, as if they don't know that the land had people, but land without people of equal worth. This is how the mindset happens. The reason I say that, because even when they discover that there are Palestinian Christians and talk to us, you think they would change. You think they would take our perspective seriously. But that doesn't happen. They still look with condescension and even this sense of supremacy. They feel sorry for us. They try to tell us how to read the Bible. They try to tell us what the problems are here. But the last thing they would do is take us seriously or take our voices seriously. And I've experienced this firsthand as a pastor, speaking over the years to American pastors, theologians, even to congressmen who boast about religious liberty. Some congressmen that I met in DC have a whole team dedicated to religious liberty and persecution of Christians, Republican senators and congressmen. And you go and meet with them and explain, look, we're struggling to survive as Christians, and they don't want to hear about it because we're challenging an ally to them. We're challenging someone that fits well with their matrix of exceptionalism, the Judeo-Christian tradition, and so on. So it's not just ignorance that they don't know that Palestinian Christians exist, or that they don't understand the organic relationship between Palestinians together, Muslims and Christians. When they ask me, how do you live with Muslims? My kids' best friends are Muslims. I mean, we're friends. I studied, their classmates. They play football together. We have business partners. They don't get that. To them, it's as if we're talking about, again, alien concepts to them. And given the sense of, again, American exceptionalism, I don't think in most cases they're receptive that they could be wrong. The last thing they think, we could be wrong, And as I said, at best, they feel sorry for us for getting it wrong, or for being in the wrong place, or being, caught in between. Something, it makes me so angry when I hear that we're caught in between. But we continue with the education. We have to. And we continue with our campaigns, traveling, writing, reaching, doing videos, because it's important that our voices are heard.
Yeah, one of the conversations that I was actually hearing with a pastor here, we were having a conversation about this, and he expressed to me that he feels that the Christian church, at least in the US, is kind of declining and dying. People aren't joining and rejoining. As it relates to the Palestinian struggle, I feel that there is a sense of abandonment by the Christian churches in the United States. And I feel I'm going to take it a step further and say, just like we see sort of the Star of David in Gaza all over the place, destroying homes and killing people without the intention of labeling the religion, right? But automatically it becomes associated with that. Same thing in the United States. When we talked about liberation theology, when it is incumbent on churches to speak up for the oppressed and speak up for those who are struggling, But we see the exact opposite. It tarnishes Christianity to a degree that is, in a way, hypocritical to say we preach from the pulpit, but we ignore those who need us. Can you elaborate a little bit on how you feel the Christian church is doing right now, particularly in the United States? And maybe is there a relationship with this? Do you think people are running away because there's a sense of hypocrisy?
I can't speak much for white people. I can tell you what people tell me, and certainly many are troubled by the responses of the church in the West towards, in particular, Gaza, because Gaza really revealed everything, uncovered a lot of things that we knew existed, but now everyone sees them, especially the hypocrisy. But also, I think it's important to emphasize and highlight that there are many who get it. There are many who support us, and there are many, I met friends in churches who have, told me, and they pledged that they will continue. They have demonstrated every single Sunday since October 7th. Talking about church leaders. So we have many support from friends around, in the United States. We have churches that completely are changing and evolving right now as a result of seeing not just the reality in Gaza, but the impact of what they have taught in the past in Gaza. We see a great awakening among many African American leaders, right, who link our struggle and the discrimination we face with the discrimination they face. But sadly, and right now with the Trump administration, we are going to witness again the right-wing Christian voices in the United States. It's one thing to feel ignored and betrayed, or as if, I think you said, we feel, as if left alone or forgotten by our siblings in the United States or in the West. It's one thing to feel that. It's another to have them work against us, directly work against us. That's the troubling part.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you're not saying anything, that in itself is troubling. Silence to me when there is a genocide in the name of the Bible is complicity. But you have some in the church who are calling for that, who are supporting that, who are endorsing it. And this is the thing that's more troubling. To me, the Christian message is summed up in, and it's not just to me, this is what Jesus said: love God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And the way Jesus explained love is very clear. It's always in sacrificial service towards other. And the neighbor is nothing as we think of, like those who look like us. Because Jesus was clear, the neighbor is anybody. You cannot, when it comes to loving the neighbor, you don't think of the identity of the neighbor. So it's the Christian DNA to love and serve others. This is why I continued saying, and I will continue to say, that the response of the church to Christian Zionism, to apartheid in Palestine, given that all of that is happening in the name of the Bible, and then to the genocide, has everything to do with the credibility of the Christian witness on multiple levels, because silence is a betrayal of what God has called us to do, to speak for the oppressed, to speak for the marginalized. It's the opposite of what Jesus embodied in his ministry. So silence doesn't serve. Silence and apathy is, and even when you become desensitized over the months and you get just, okay, let's pray for peace, it goes counter to everything that I think Jesus stood for and the Bible stands for. And then on the other hand, the other side, those who support Zionism and Christian Zionism, are supporting openly and clearly an ideology of supremacy, of discrimination, of ethnic cleansing and apartheid. This is what Zionism is. I'm not trying to be aggressive or mean. Zionism, by definition, necessitates the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. Read what the Zionist leaders said in the beginning, and read what the Zionist leaders are saying now. They want the land without Palestinians. This is what Zionism by definition is. So to support that is counter to the Christian ideals. And I would even argue it's counter to the Jewish ideals as many Jews understand them. For example, Jewish Voice for Peace and others. So when we face ideologies and theologies of supremacies, of power, of discrimination, and we don't take a stand against, you're complicit. And it's even worse when you're calling for these ideals in the name of the Bible. And honestly, this is a big reason why we've been so vocal here in Palestine, because it's damaging the credibility of the Christian witness. It's against everything Jesus taught, Jesus who was the embodiment of meekness, of humility. Nothing about supremacy in the Christian teaching, yet this is what Zionism is about. So to me, what I'm doing and what my colleagues are doing and have been doing over the years really stems from our faith in the nature of God as a just and loving God, and in the ministry of Jesus, who called us, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek, the ones who are thirsty and hungry for justice, for righteousness, those who pursue peace." This is the calling of Christians, and this is why we're doing all of this.
Yeah, and I do have to say, we've seen an unprecedented surge in the movement within the Christian community. I want to mention just a few really important things, actually, that are happening here in the United States and happened. In May 2024, the United Methodist Church voted to divest from Israel bonds. I mean, this is huge. Another in July 2024, the Presbyterian Church voted to divest from Israeli bonds, and also other denominations also passed resolutions denouncing Christian Zionism. To your point, the AFSC, the American Friends Services Committee, has an apartheid-free pledge that has 425 organizations signed on it for apartheid-free.
Yeah, amazing.
Right? 80 congregations. Now there's the Take a Stand campaign by also various organizations. So there is a huge movement to support Palestinians in the Christian sphere, if you will.
There are many more. There
Yes.
are many more, and
Absolutely.
we work with many of them directly and indirectly. We coordinate with many of them, and I'm grateful for. In fact, as I said, many of them are taking very bold and concrete steps, as embodying what we say and what we call here costly solidarity. It's not just I'm praying for you, but I know that there is a price to pay, especially in the toxic environment you have right now in the United States, where it seems you can talk about anything except for Palestine without being labeled. And so I'm really grateful for those witnesses.
How do you recommend people in the United States connect with the churches in Palestine, with your church or with other groups that are working on sort of the bridging the gap between Palestinian liberation and Christianity?
We're easily found, we're accessible, and I would strongly encourage that you link with either an American organization that does education work in the United States, advocacy, or raising awareness, speaking on behalf of Palestinians and amplifying the voices of Palestinians, or organizations that have immediate contact with grassroots Palestinian Christian movements that are doing the work on the ground. And as I said, please just search and you'll find us, whether here in Palestine or our counterparts in the United States, or those just involved in raising awareness in the United States.
So, Reverend, I wanted to ask you about your book, The Other Side of the Wall, a Palestinian Christian Narrative of Lament and Hope. Can you walk me through the process of why you wrote the book and sort of the motivation behind it? Because I think something you mentioned is you're living not just behind this ugly physical concrete wall, right? There's just so much more to it.
Yes, one of the things I try to explain in that book is that walls exist before they are constructed, and that we as Palestinians have always been on the other side of the wall. The framing of our land as a land without people is equivalent to putting us in ghetto walls behind those walls and make us invisible. And the fact that we are invisible to the hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who visit Palestine on an annual basis before, of course, this war and before COVID, who would spend at best 2 to 3 hours on the Palestinian side, illustrates that idea. And it's not just that we are physically invisible behind the walls. And by the way, walls don't only hide, walls communicate that those on the other side are dangerous, are to be feared, are the problem. So we're protecting, we're defending, and so in the process, those on the other side of the wall are demonized and dehumanized. And the book tells stories of the systematic dehumanization of Palestinians, including that of Palestinian Christians. I tell many painful stories that I've experienced of being rejected by Christian leaders in the West by virtue of being Palestinian. I mean, I would be disinvited from conferences. Why? Because I'm a Palestinian, even without knowing my views. And so this confirmed to me that there is this deep systematic, it's not just discrimination, but looking at Palestinians as inferiors and less humans. And this is, you see it even more so today. So that was my first book, The Other Side of the Wall. And I tell stories, but I also explain the theology of Palestinians, how we read the Bible, and especially in conversation with Christian Zionists in particular. My next book hopefully will be published at the beginning of 2025, but it's available for pre-order. I call it Christ in the Rubble: Faith, the Bible, and the Genocide in Gaza. It's about faith, the Bible, and the genocide. It explains what happened in Gaza, but then it really gets into the discussions around the genocide, why I insisted from the beginning and why I insist even more so today that this is a genocide, whether the international law matters to us as Christians or not, and these definitions. But most importantly, I talk a lot about the context, why we kept saying as Palestinians, and from the very beginning, when this war started, we sent letters saying this war did not start on October 7th, context matters. So I explain both the long and then immediate context. But then the bulk of the Bible is the challenge I was part of, especially in the last year, in addressing the complicity of churches, some churches, of course, because part of the book is on those who supported us, but the complicity of some Christians in this war and why we called them out, and the concept that I explained at the beginning of Christ in the Rubble, how we came up with that concept, the immediate reaction, and then the global reaction, and so it gives a journey through the way I experienced it, but then through the ministry that I was part in the last year, whether speaking in the streets of London 2000s, in the Congress, in the White House, to the numerous TV interviews I gave, or to the viral sermons that were viewed all over the world. I, tried to articulate what was happening here, why I'm saying these things, and ends up with this charge to not just to Christians, to everybody. Gaza is the moral compass of our world today, and why we need to act and what we need to do in particular in response to a genocide that's happened in front of the world. It was not an easy book to write, honestly, given the topic, the experience that it's still happening, the pain and trauma of all of this, and it's nothing in comparison to what's happening in Gaza, but it's also about reliving the difficult conversations we've had with church leaders who we thought they would support us, but then kept echoing Israel has the right to defend itself, and how we responded. So it wasn't an easy book to write at all, especially when we're still going through that war.
So when the book does come out, and if you are able to travel to the US, specifically in the DC area, we would welcome you and would love to have a conversation about the book with you, if that's okay.
Thank you. Of course, be honored.
Reverend Munther, thank you for your book and writing it and putting everything, documenting everything. It's so crucial. At the beginning of the episode, I started with how you see the display for Christmas transforming this year, or has it, or how it has changed. We will be listening to this episode during Christmas. And you delivered such an important and powerful message last year that reached millions upon millions upon millions and informed them about the Palestinian cause, but also about Christianity in Palestine. We would be honored if you would share this year's Christmas message to our audience.
I'm really hoping that by the time we have Christmas, which is in a few weeks, the war would be over. This is really what I hope and pray for. And when friends kept asking me, what will you do this Christmas? I really and honestly kept saying, I wish I have to do nothing. It's heartbreaking that we continue to plead with the world for a ceasefire. Yet we cannot fail the people of Gaza. knowing that I feel we failed them. So we have to continue. This time of the year, I'm really thinking a lot of the concept of Sumud and survive. And I'm not just saying this because the name of your podcast is Sumud, but this is what we're left with as Palestinians. The thing in Christian circles, they always like to ask us about hope. And I say, I don't think we can even talk about hope today. The question is, are we going to survive? And what can we do to enable our people? How can our faith enable us survive the brutality of what's happening? And this has everything to do with again, Sumud, holding fast to the righteousness of our cause, to the justice of our cause, and insisting that we want to see a better future. It all begins with surviving. And I'm not just saying this as a cliche, because if you talk to anybody in Gaza right now, the first thing they think, will we survive this war? Will it ever end? The same here in the West Bank. We hear about annexation. We hear about what some of those who are around Trump are saying about the coming era. Will we survive? I don't know. And this is where even faith and prayer become acts of resistance. You think, will I give up my faith in a just and righteous God? Or will I continue to insist that God will deliver justice? Christmas is about the visitation of God to our earth through a child, not through fireworks and big displays, but through the symbol of vulnerability and meekness. And may we find any sense of comfort that will help us survive, persevere in the midst of very, very difficult and brutal times. I think this year it's going to be very hard to talk about cliches like hope and joy in the midst of everything that's happening. And as people of faith, I feel that our role is just to keep strengthening one another, encouraging one another, standing next to each other so that we survive this very, very difficult moment.
I appreciate that message. I think it's a much needed message. It's very important for us to hear. So thank you for that. Reverend, we mentioned you coming out to DC at one point, hopefully to talk about your book, but I sincerely hope that me, you, and Zeina and our families will be able to visit you on our land in peace and have a cup of tea without fear of being hurt or harmed.
Ya Rab. Amen.
Reverend, thank you so much for being with us, for empowering our communities in Palestine and the United States. And thank you for the Christmas message and the message in general. And we hope more people listen to you and take heed of your warnings and your advice. It was an honor to have you. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me. And Merry Christmas to everyone.
Merry Christmas.
Listen, stay tuned, cause it's time for some mood.